tonight, if you weren't thinking of lighting your menorah, do it for those who were killed. Light a candle for them. Light a candle for our people who are suffering right now.
Okay, what have you done? You have led this captivity. This is your fault. Well done. Blood on your hands is going to be hurt.
Plenty of mixed emotions in Sydney, Australia this week in the aftermath of Sunday's Hanukkah terrorist murder of 15 Jews. From that TV interview given by Sydney Rabbi Levi Wolf shortly after the attack, to the furious accusations shouted at Australian politicians who were heading into a memorial service the next day held at the Chabad synagogue, where now the funerals for some of the victims are being held on Wednesday, starting with the MC of the beachside event, Assistant Rabbi Eli Schlanger, whose brother lives in Toronto and whose sister was a Jewish educator in Ottawa. The funeral for Rabbi Yaakov Levitan, who was helping to run the beachside carnival, was set for later Wednesday afternoon. And Michael Gencher was going to attend. Gencher is from Ottawa originally. He moved to Australia in the 1990s. He's been a Jewish community leader there and now runs Australia's branch of Stand With Us, a pro-Israel advocacy organization for university students. Gencher was a close friend of Rabbi Schlanger, who served as a witness at Gencher's wedding. On the evening of Sunday's massacre, Gencher and his son were attending a Hanukkah event at another synagogue across the Sydney Harbour Bridge in the city's North Shore. When the alerts began to sound, Gencher could already guess something terrible had happened, and he blames the Australian government for ignoring the escalating anti-Semitism which has exploded in his adoptive country since October 7th. Cars torched, graffiti and vandalism. 2 nurses at a Sydney hospital saying on TikTok they would kill their Jewish or Israeli patients. A deli burned, suspects threatening worshippers at his synagogue, and a Melbourne synagogue firebombed last December. And now this.
We are only 117,000 Jews in Australia. And what we've seen over the last 2 years has been appalling. And we keep drawing lines in the sand, and those lines keep getting crossed.
I'm Ellin Bessner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Wednesday, December 17th, 2025. Welcome to North Star, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, made possible thanks to the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. 50,000 Canadians are reported to be living in Australia, according to official census figures, and Global Affairs Canada says it's not aware of any Canadians hurt in Sunday's terror attack. But the Jewish Canadian expats who live in Australia are experiencing so many emotions in the aftermath: shock, grief, and anger. We have 2 guests on today's episode. Later, we'll chat with Jason Adessky, a Montrealer who lives with his wife and 3 kids in Sydney, who were at Bondi Beach on that day, but decided it was too hot to remain for the Hanukkah festival. And now, Adessky is full of what-ifs. But first, we've reached Michael Gencher at his home in Sydney just hours after the shooting. Sorry we have to meet at this hard occasion, but thanks for joining us.
No, Ellen, thank you. Very, very happy to be here.
Listen, what can you tell us now about the impact on your community of the horrible thing that happened on Sunday at Bondi Beach?
Yeah, so let me frame it for you. It's an amazing night. First night of Hanukkah. There's an established tradition here in Sydney where all the Chabad shuls put on very public, very open Hanukkah events, lighting of the candles. And, you know, the shuls may be only a couple kilometers apart, but it's a wonderful night to look forward to. You know, I've been attending these events since they've started. I take my kids with me, and we have a great time. And yeah, obviously, with what happened yesterday, you know, we know that there has been a probable threat warning for a while, certainly over the last 2 years. But the difference between the hypothetical and the reality of what happened is so difficult to process. You know, you asked me before we started, did I get much sleep last night? And I didn't. And I've been thinking about all the possibilities past, all the opportunities going forward, how vulnerable we are. Most importantly, thinking about my kids. How does the framing of me now dropping my children off at school? They go to Hebrew school, which is already under heavy armed guard. How does going to shul tomorrow? Rabbi Schlanger is a very good friend of mine who passed, and I think about, excuse me,
I'm so sorry for your loss.
going tomorrow, to his funeral, and how life now is completely different. Overnight, the landscape for the Australian Jewish community and the greater community has changed. And it's those questions that certainly frame, the life ahead for my family, for the work we do as a community, one of the communal organizations in the fight against anti-Semitism. It's really the great unknown. And I hate to say, we can look to examples around the globe of how they've gotten through. And we are a resilient people. We've been incredibly resilient here in Australia with what we have faced over the last 2 years. But now it's an entirely different proposition for the Jewish community. And let me give you, Ellen, if you don't mind me running on, you're actually helping me with my thoughts. So I thank you for this opportunity, because that's what it is. And I'm sure the 117 odd thousand Jews in Australia right now, all of them are doing what I'm doing, and that's trying to put our thoughts together and figure out how we take the next step. The reality is now, the future is here, and it's getting through that. And we don't have this kind of background of resilience of this. Many of us have lived in Israel, our families are in Israel. And, one of the big conversations here in Australia over the last 2 years has been the plan B. What is our plan B? It's been a plan B at arm's length, because the reality is, what is the final line in the sand that gets us out of here? And I think that's the tough decision. It's hard to go to university as a Jewish kid, to be openly, visibly Jewish. It's challenging in the workplace. Every aspect of our lives for the last 2 years has been challenging in terms of fighting anti-Semitism and fighting the anti-Israel narrative that is existing. And it's that challenge ahead. And I'm going to note as I'm speaking to Ellen, I've got 2 phones on, I've got 2 computers going. I'm sorry, I'm trying to give you all my attention, but there's a lot going on today. One thing that has been hard to deal with over the last 2 years is the silence from the greater community here in Australia. Certainly we have our friends, and we have communities that support us, but it's been quiet. And this morning it has been a flood from the greater community. I measure that by my friends, social media, Facebook, the messages of support are coming in. So as these messages come in, obviously there's a sense of hope that people are aware of, what has happened, what we're feeling, and possibly imagining what we're feeling, and maybe thinking about what has the last 2 years been for the Australian Jewish community, the global Jewish community.
Were you there at the beach?
So we were at one of the Chabad events. We were not at the one that you've seen the footage of. I was there with my 8-year-old son, and the announcement came over the Rumcol, the loudspeaker. That for the next 45 minutes, we appreciate no one leaving. And straight away, a wave came over the event. There's thousands of people there. Everybody is on their phones. All the grown-ups, the adults, are looking at each other, nodding. We all know what's happening. And, my 8-year-old son goes, "What's with all the sirens? Why are there all the police here?" And it came over. We knew what was going on. I shouldn't say we knew what was going on, but we had a pretty good idea what was going on, and sitting and waiting.
You mentioned silence. So you had the bombing of the synagogue in Melbourne. Then in August, Australia cut ties with Iran and blamed Tehran for a lot of the terror. And then didn't the government just say recently they're going to have this whole program to cut back on anti-Semitism and crack down? How do you weigh all these things? Tell me in a political vein, how you process all those things at the same time as this.
In a political vein, I hang this event on our government. We have had 2 years of words with opposite action. We've had promises of, addressing the issues of anti-Semitism, of cracking down, but it has been nothing more than merely words of politicians who have, to be honest, Ellen, to say emboldened is not even scratching the surface of what we have here. We had appointments of, a special envoy for anti-Semitism. We have had platitudes of warm words and support and promises of actions. Nothing on the ground has changed. Nothing. And last night, to see our prime minister on TV, I don't think there is I would like to think there isn't an Australian, but that's not true. But there's certainly, I wouldn't think that there's a Jewish Australian who watched that and was not in some way incensed or enraged by listening to this person whose role is to protect our rights and freedoms and our way of life like every Australian should have, and yet has absolutely moved from incident to incident, doing the best in terms of political spin just to get by. The reference, we use in Australia the expression kicking the can down the street. And that's what we have had. This is not going away. This government has hoped this would go away. But as you see, for example, I'll give you an example. In Sydney, you probably saw it on the global news, the Sydney Harbour Bridge. There was an enormous march in support of Palestine. Now, many state, and we have 3 levels of government here in Australia. We've got local, state, and federal. Many government representatives should hang their heads in shame. I was on the bridge on that day. I don't know if many of them were, but those that supported that march for Palestine, and you could frame it in yes, no one can support and the innocent death. But to hear, globalize the Intifada on a scale like that, and to see it represented in media and press, well, last night we saw what globalize the Intifada means. And this is a statement, a comment, an agenda across universities, workplaces, within the unions. And yeah, I guess politically, our government has done nothing, really nothing other than words. They've put a special envoy for anti-Semitism in place and totally disregarded all of her recommendations and actions that should be taken. Hanukkah, strangely enough, if you wanted to look at it, could potentially be could be next to Yom Ha'atzmaut, the second most Zionist Chag that we have, if you break it down what it's about. And to hear, some of our politicians that have not been our friends wishing us Chag Sameach, the irony, the hypocrisy of it all.
I'm very sorry about your friend, and
Thanks, Helen. All the best.
Ever since October 7th, 2023, Muslim and Jewish communities in Canada have been torn apart.
I've known you for 20 years. You've been at my house for Shabbat supper, I don't know how many times. And for 1 second, you can't put down your front and just hold my hand?
We're fed a constant stream of Jews and Muslims talking at each other, about each other, but rarely do we hear them talking to each other.
There was, why are you doing this? What's the benefit of doing this?
This podcast aims to do something different. I'm Avi Feingold, a rabbi and a writer with the Canadian Jewish News.
I'm Yafa Sakeja, a Canadian-Palestinian entrepreneur and volunteer with the Canadian Friends of Standing Together.
We're sitting down with Jews and Muslims, Israelis and Palestinians, from coast to coast and across the political divide, having difficult conversations in good faith.
We are not the Israeli government. Palestinians are not Hamas.
This is the place where we're both supposed to end up, Israeli and Palestinian, Arab and Jewish.
Subscribe to In Good Faith, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Jason Adessky grew up in Hampstead, one of Canada's most densely Jewish neighborhoods. He and his wife are raising their children in Sydney, and the kids have just started their summer school holidays. And we're anticipating spending the first night of Hanukkah together with Jason's widowed mother, who lives in Côte St. Luc. She'd just flown over from Canada for a visit. The Adeskys live about 12 kilometers away from the site of Sunday's attack, but on that day, they had driven to the Bondi Beach area to shop for Hanukkah. They narrowly missed being there when the shooting started. I reached Jason at his home. Tell us a bit about what you did on Sunday.
Yeah, so I mean, it was a beautiful sunny day here, summertime in Sydney. So we woke up, got ourselves organized. Kids are on school holidays, and so we went out to. We live about 10 or 12 kilometers away from Bondi, and we got in the car and drove over towards Bondi to pick up sufganiyot and some candles and that sort of thing in preparation for Hanukkah, like we would every year. And it was it was a lovely day. It was very, very hot, unfortunately. So we were thinking about, there's lots of posters around, and we're thinking about going to seeing what was doing over there at the beach, which is an annual event. But because it was just too hot, and we had my mom with us, who's a little bit older, we decided it wasn't the right thing to do. So we decided to come home and make a lovely dinner and play with the dreidels and had the sufganiyot and the latkes and so on and so forth. And then we were just having a nice dinner, lighting the candles, and literally as the candles are being lit by the kids, my phone starts beeping, and the news reports start coming in about this. It can only be described as a horrifying attack. And then we were just glued to our phones and to the TV for the rest of the evening, watching the terrible events unfold.
When you were near there, you said you went to get some sufganiyot. Is that a Jewish area, the beach? I'm not sure.
Yeah. So so that whole Bondi area, so there's Bondi, Rose Bay, Vaucluse, Dover Heights, and so on and so forth, which is all what's called the eastern suburbs of Sydney. That's where many of most of the Jewish community tend to live. Most of the synagogues are there. And it was funny. As we were driving back from the bakery with the donuts, I pointed out to my mom, who's from Montreal, as you know, the Chabad, the Chabad house that had actually organized the event at the beach that evening. And yeah, there's I don't know, probably 8 or 10, maybe more, different synagogues and various affiliated organizations in that region. The bakery that we went to was maybe 500 meters from the beach.
What's it called?
Jesse's, which is great. So we went to Jesse's. They do a great challah for her that we like to pick up. We also, there's a bunch of different bakeries and a bunch of different restaurants and all the different amenities that you would expect of the Jewish community providing in that sort of part of town. But as I said, it was a bit hot, so we decided to come back home and stay cool and stay by the pool. Yeah.
And that decision, now that you're thinking about it.
Yeah, look, it's you try not to think about what ifs, but that's the world we live in. Unfortunately, it's a dangerous place, and it was a horrifying situation. You never expect anything like this to happen in a place like Sydney, but sadly, there's no escaping anti-Semitism wherever you go, and yeah, it's devastating. There's no doubt about it.
A lot of people are saying they're not surprised because of the rampant anti-Semitism that's already been happening in Australia, especially in Melbourne, where the synagogue was firebombed, and then there was lots of things happening. How have you noticed since October 7th? You've lived there a long time, but how is it for you as a Jewish person in the community?
Yeah, I mean, I remember growing up as a kid in Montreal, and you'd go to synagogue for the holidays or whenever you'd go, and you'd see a random, there's always security, but you'd see a random police car here or there or something like that. But I was actually just similarly speaking about this recently. The synagogue we went to for the holidays this year, like they had just cordoned off blocks and blocks. I mean, as I said, it's not a huge area, but they'd cordoned off huge blocks around the synagogue with a ton of police, a ton of private security and private ambulances and all that sort of stuff. And it just, on the one hand, it's comforting to see that level of security, but on the other hand, obviously quite horrifying and quite distressing to be having to need that sort of that level of protection. But yeah, the you can feel that there's an unease in the community, and understandably so. There's been some really awful things happening in and around town. There's obviously terrible things happening down in Melbourne as well, which is a much bigger community than it is here in Sydney. But yeah, I mean, the October 7th attacks were unprecedented and devastating on a whole other level. And unfortunately, Australia hasn't been immune to the unfortunate consequences of some of the behaviors that have emerged as a result of that.
Are you and your kids and family going to be doing differently things that you would have been doing? Now your mom is here. Have you decided to change some of your plans for the next little while, or?
I don't think so. We're not all that close to that. As I said, we're about 10 or 12 kilometers away from that particular part of town. I don't know if it's a foolhardy approach, but my view is you can't give in and you can't allow these sorts of things to change the way you want to live your life. And we have a lovely life here. We love our home here in Sydney. We love our community. We love everything about being here. And changing that feels like the wrong thing to do.
I hear we have lots of pets in the background, so we'll just tell our listeners the noise. It sounds like a bird and a dog. But your mom is here visiting, and I know, and full disclosure, we're related, but she was in Israel during the Iran attack in the summer of, with Israel and Iran. And now she's visiting you when they had the biggest terrorist attack ever in Australia against Jews. How is this impacting her? So she survived one thing, and now she's here.
Yeah, I mean, I was with her for that bat mitzvah this past summer for that attack, of course. So, I mean, for me, it sort of comes back to what you were saying earlier. It's like, would you change your behavior? No, I mean, I wanted to go to the bat mitzvah in Israel because that's what we do, right? That's what Jews do. That's what families do. You go and you do the things that matter. And I think my mom was of the same opinion. She wanted to do the things that mattered. She wanted to go to to Jerusalem, and yeah, the reality was we had a wonderful time there. It was a bit fraught and a bit scary at times, but it was the right thing to do, and we were glad we did go. I think she's literally just walked up the stairs and woken up. So she's here, and she seems to be okay. But yeah, look, as I said, we're all just glued to the TV watching what was happening following what's happening on social media, and we'll go about our day. I mean, today the plan had been to go and do some Hanukkah shopping for the kids, right? And get some gifts for the kids, and I think she still plans to do that, and I'm sure the kids still want to do that.
Do you want to share, how what you think needs to be done politically in Australia?
Yeah, I wouldn't profess to be an expert in the politics of how to manage anti-Semitism. I think this government has been on the more lenient side, and certainly more left-leaning, and more proactive in terms of recognition um, of the Palestinian state, which has created divisions. Right? It's obvious. Do I think that the government is employing the correct policies? Again, that's not for me to comment on. I've got views on certain politicians and so on and so forth, but ultimately, we live in a democracy, and people vote for what they think is right. My personal view is I don't know that we've got it quite right, and yesterday's events lend credence to that.
Is there anything you want me to understand, Jason, about how this is sitting with you and your family?
Look, it's obviously very unsettling, and very distressing. We've got young kids, and how do you explain to them what has happened, and how they should be thinking about these things going forward, and how should they be thinking about, you never want to tell a teenager or a tween or whatever that they have to be looking over their shoulder. That's not the world that you want to grow up in, that you want to teach your kids about. So it's challenging, but it's the unfortunate reality of where we are today, and you just have to deal with it. I mean, the one positive, if you can take from it, is that the Australian government banned social media for under 16s recently, and so in a funny kind of way, that I don't know if it helps, but it certainly, hopefully will mitigate to some small degree some of the firestorm that's emerging and will continue to emerge, no doubt.
What did you tell your kids?
Well, last night, I mean, they're still asleep. But last night it was just a lot of shock, and, as I said, just a lot of watching the news unfold. We just told them you love them, just put them to bed. That was it. And we'll have a more fulsome conversation today.
We send our hugs and strength to you guys as you're going through this, and we'll be in touch. Thank you for being on the
Thanks,
CJN's North Star podcast.
Thanks, Ellen. Take care.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounded like for this episode of North Star, made possible thanks to the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Gronowski-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. North Star is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman, with Michael Freeman as the executive producer. You can go to the links in our show notes to learn more about how to donate to help the victims of the attack in Australia. Thanks for listening.